The kingdom of Azreia was a land of breathtaking beauty, with rolling golden fields that stretched beyond the horizon and rivers that shimmered like liquid silver under the sunlight. Its people were proud of their prosperous home, but none were more admired than their royal family, especially the young and charismatic Prince Kalan. The prince had been away on a diplomatic journey for several years, and whispers of his return spread like wildfire, filling the kingdom with excitement. Yet, while most of Azreia prepared for celebrations, not everyone in the kingdom shared in the joy. In a small, crumbling estate on the outskirts of the capital, a young girl named Imarya toiled away in silence. Her hands were rough and calloused from endless hours of scrubbing, her once delicate fingers now worn from the harshness of her duties. Despite her struggles, there was a light in her that refused to dim. Imarya carried herself with quiet grace, her warm brown eyes filled with a kindness that seemed to defy the cruelty she faced daily. She was a stark contrast to her stepmother, Azreia, a woman as cold and unyielding as the stone walls of their estate. Azreia ruled the household with an iron grip, ensuring that Imarya never forgot her place. To Azreia, Imarya was nothing more than a burden, a reminder of the late wife of her husband, whose memory she despised. Azreia's two daughters, Safina and Arindra, mirrored their mother's vanity and arrogance. They treated Imarya as a servant, ridiculing her at every opportunity and taking delight in her misfortunes. Imarya's days were filled with endless chores, from cleaning the grand dining hall that no one ever used to mending the extravagant gowns her stepsisters wore to flaunt their wealth. Her nights were no better, as she was forced to sleep on a straw mat in the cold attic, away from the warmth of the hearth. Yet, despite the hardships, Imarya found solace in the small, overgrown garden at the back of the estate. It was a hidden corner of the world that her mother had tended to with love before her passing. Among the wildflowers and tangled vines, Imarya felt a connection to her mother's memory, a reminder of the love and happiness she once knew. One evening, as Imarya quietly trimmed the wilted roses in the garden, the sound of distant trumpets echoed through the air. She paused, her heart quickening as she recognized the royal call. From the top of the estate's stone staircase, Azreia and her daughters appeared, their faces alight with curiosity. Moments later, a royal messenger arrived at their doorstep, bearing a gilded scroll. Azreia snatched the scroll with greedy fingers and unrolled it with a flourish. Her sharp eyes scanned the contents, and a wicked smile spread across her lips. "Prince Kalan has returned," she announced, her voice dripping with excitement. "And he has declared a grand ball to find a bride. Every eligible maiden in the kingdom is invited to attend." Safina and Arindra squealed with delight, already envisioning themselves draped in jewels and dancing with the prince. Imarya, who had been standing silently in the shadows, felt a flicker of hope ignite in her chest. A ball! The thought of escaping her dreary life, even for a single night, was enough to make her heart soar. But Azreia's gaze quickly fell upon her, and the smile vanished. "Don't think for a moment that you'll be going," she sneered. "You'll stay here where you belong, cleaning up after us. A girl like you has no place at the royal palace." Imarya lowered her head, hiding the disappointment that threatened to spill over. She knew better than to argue with Azreia, but deep down, she couldn't help but dream of what might be. As the sun set over Azreia, casting the fields in hues of amber and crimson, Imarya whispered a silent wish to the stars above. Far away in the grand halls of the palace, Prince Kalan stood on the balcony overlooking his kingdom. Though he was beloved by his people and admired for his bravery, his heart felt heavy. The ball had been his advisor's idea, a solution to the growing pressure for him to marry and secure the future of Azreia. Yet Kalan longed for something more than a political alliance. He yearned for a connection that went beyond titles and wealth, for someone who saw him not as a prince, but as a man. As the winds carried the distant sounds of the kingdom preparing for the ball, Kalan turned his gaze to the horizon. He couldn't shake the feeling that this event, though orchestrated by tradition, would change his life in ways he could never imagine. Imarya's life was a relentless cycle of toil and humiliation, each day bleeding into the next, with the same grueling tasks and sharp words hurled at her by her stepmother, Azreia. From the crack of dawn, Imarya would rise to scrub the stone floors of the grand but decaying estate, her hands raw from the coarse brushes and harsh soaps. No matter how much she cleaned, Azreia always found a reason to criticize her work. "Is this what you call clean?" Azreia snapped one morning, her sharp eyes scanning a spotless parlor floor. "You're as useless as your mother was." The words stung, but Imarya swallowed her anger and sadness, bowing her head in silence. She had long learned that standing up to Azreia only invited more cruelty. Azreia delighted in reminding Imarya of her place in the household, emphasizing that she was no more than a burden and a shadow in her own home. The stepsisters, Safina and Arindra, were no better. They paraded around the estate in gowns made of silk and velvet, their laughter echoing through the halls as they flaunted their privilege. They often mocked Imarya's patched dresses and bare feet, their words dripping with scorn. "Imagine someone like you at the palace," Safina said with a sneer one day, holding up an elegant gown she planned to wear to the ball. "You'd embarrass the kingdom." "More like frighten the prince," Arindra added, tossing a jeweled tiara onto a nearby table. Their laughter rang out as Imarya quietly continued her work, dusting the mantelpiece as though their words hadn't cut into her. But she could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, the sting of their cruelty threatening to bring tears to her eyes. Their excitement over the upcoming ball only heightened their taunts. They spent hours preening in front of gilded mirrors, trying on dresses and practicing their curtsies. Every snide comment about the prince choosing one of them over a nobody like Imarya was another blow to her spirit. Despite their constant jeers and Azreia's venomous tongue, Imarya refused to let her heart harden. She found solace in her secret garden, hidden behind the estate where no one else bothered to go. The garden was overgrown and wild, but to Imarya, it was a sanctuary. It had been her mother's favorite place, a space where life thrived freely and beauty grew even in the harshest conditions. In the evenings, after her chores were done, Imarya would escape to the garden, her bare feet brushing against the soft grass. She tended to the wildflowers, coaxing them back to life with gentle hands and whispers of encouragement, just as her mother had once done. Among the blooms, she felt a connection to her mother's memory, a reminder of love, warmth, and the strength to endure. Imarya often sat by a small stone bench carved with her mother's favorite saying, "Hope blooms where kindness is sown." The words gave her strength, even on the darkest days. She would close her eyes and imagine a life beyond the estate, a life where she was free to be herself, unburdened by Azreia's cruelty. One evening, as the last rays of sunlight bathed the garden in golden hues, Imarya knelt by a patch of lilies her mother had planted years ago. They were wilted now, but she carefully tended to them, believing that, like her, they could bloom again with time and care. Though her hands were rough and her back ached from the day's labor, Imarya smiled faintly as she worked. No matter how much Azreia tried to crush her spirit, she refused to let the bitterness seep into her soul. Her mother's teachings had been clear. Strength was not in how much one endured, but in how one chose to rise above it. And so, even as her stepmother and stepsisters continued to demean her, Imarya clung to the quiet strength within her, tending not only to the garden but to the hope that one day her life would change. The morning after the royal messenger's visit, the household of Azreia buzzed with a frenzied energy. The gilded scroll announcing the grand ball lay open on the parlor table, the royal seal glinting in the sunlight. Azreia held court in the center of the room, her sharp eyes darting between her daughters as they paraded before her in gowns of varying splendor. "The prince is a man of discerning taste," Zaleria declared, her voice cutting through the air. We must ensure one of you captures his attention. This is an opportunity we cannot squander. Safina twirled in a shimmering gown of emerald green, her golden hair cascading down her back. Do you think this will do, Mother? She asked, her voice tinged with both vanity and insecurity. Zaleria eyed the gown critically. It's acceptable, but we'll need to add more jewels. You must dazzle him, my dear. Irindra, draped in a ruby-red dress, pouted as she adjusted the lace at her neckline. What about me, Mother? Surely the prince will find me irresistible. Zaleria gave her an approving nod. With the right adornments, you'll both outshine any other girl in the kingdom. Imarya, standing silently in the corner with a broom in hand, listened to their conversation with a heart full of longing. She dared not speak, but the idea of the ball had planted a seed of hope in her. The thought of escaping her grim life, even for just one night, was enough to make her dream of a world beyond the walls of the estate. That evening, as the household slept, Imarya crept into the attic where her meagre belongings were stored. Among the dust and cobwebs lay an old trunk, its hinges creaking as she opened it. Inside was a simple yet elegant gown, yellowed with age, but still beautiful in its craftsmanship. It had belonged to her mother, a keepsake from a happier time. Imarya held the dress close, her fingers brushing over the delicate embroidery. Tears pricked her eyes as memories of her mother's laughter and warmth flooded back to her. Determined to make it work, she began altering the dress in secret, using scraps of fabric and thread she'd hidden away over the years. Every stitch was a thread of hope, a step closer to her dream of attending the ball. As days turned into nights, Imarya worked tirelessly on the dress, stealing moments whenever Zaleria and her daughters were preoccupied. She imagined herself dancing in the grand palace, her heart free of the weight it carried daily. But her secret was not to remain hidden for long. One afternoon, as Imarya carefully stitched the hem of the gown in her attic sanctuary, the door burst open. Zaleria stood in the doorway, her face a mask of fury. "What is this?" she hissed, snatching the dress from Imarya's hands. Imarya's heart sank as she stammered. I only wanted to. Do you think you're worthy of attending the royal ball? Zaleria spat, her voice laced with venom. You, a lowly servant pretending to be something you're not. Before Imarya could protest, Zaleria tore the dress from seam to seam, the sound of ripping fabric echoing in the small attic. Imarya fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face as she reached for the remnants of her mother's gown. "Please!" she begged, her voice breaking. "It was my mother's!" Zaleria's eyes narrowed, and with a cruel smirk, she reached for the delicate necklace that hung around Imarya's neck. It was the only piece of her mother Imarya had left, a simple silver pendant with a small, worn gem at its center. "No!" Imarya cried, clutching at the necklace. But Zaleria was relentless. With a sharp tug, she tore it from Imarya's neck and threw it to the floor, crushing it beneath her heel. The sound of the gem shattering was like a dagger to Imarya's heart. "You'll learn your place, girl," Zaleria sneered. "You will not ruin this opportunity for my daughters." With that, Zaleria ordered the estate's servant to drag Imarya to the cellar. Imarya struggled, her pleas falling on deaf ears as she was locked away in the cold, damp room. The heavy door slammed shut, and the sound of the key, turning in the lock, echoed through the darkness. Imarya sat on the stone floor, her tears falling silently as she clutched the torn remains of her dress. The world above bustled with preparations for the ball, but for Imarya, the light of hope had dimmed. In the quiet of the cellar, she whispered a prayer to the memory of her mother, clinging to the faintest glimmer of faith that her story was not yet over. The hours dragged on in the cold, damp cellar, as Imarya sat slumped against the wall, her tears long dried on her cheeks. The shredded remains of her mother's gown lay crumpled in her lap, a cruel reminder of the dreams that Zaleria had so easily destroyed. The flicker of hope that had once warmed her heart was now dim, nearly extinguished by the weight of despair. She whispered into the darkness, her voice barely audible. "Mother, if you can hear me, please, I don't know what to do." As if in response to her plea, the faintest sound of footsteps echoed down the stone staircase. Imarya stiffened, her breath catching in her throat. The heavy door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside, silhouetted by the faint light from the hallway. It was an old woman, her frame hunched, but her movements steady and deliberate. She wore a simple cloak, patched and frayed, and her grey hair was tied back with a faded ribbon. There was nothing remarkable about her appearance, yet her eyes held a strange, knowing glimmer that sent a shiver through Imarya. "Child," the woman said softly, her voice warm and soothing, "why do you cry in such a place of darkness?" Imarya hesitated, unsure of whether to trust the stranger, but the kindness in the woman's tone eased her fears, and she found herself pouring out her heart. She spoke of her stepmother's cruelty, her stepsister's mockery, and her dream of attending the ball, now shattered like the necklace Azreia had destroyed. The old woman listened intently, nodding now and then as if she already knew the story, but wanted to hear it from Imarya herself. When the girl had finished, the woman stepped closer, her eyes shining with an intensity that belied her frail appearance. "You have endured much, my dear," she said, her voice tinged with both sorrow and admiration. "And yet your heart remains pure, untainted by bitterness. It is for that reason I have come." Imarya blinked in confusion. Who are you?" The woman smiled, a mysterious yet gentle curve of her lips. "My name is Mylora, and I am not as ordinary as I may appear." With a wave of her hand, the air around her seemed to shimmer, as though the very fabric of reality had rippled. The frayed cloak transformed into a garment of deep, rich emeralds, adorned with golden threads that seemed to glimmer in the dim light. Her hunched posture straightened, and her eyes, once soft, now burned with an almost otherworldly radiance. Imarya gasped, shrinking back against the wall. You're an enchantress." "Yes," Mylora replied with a nod. "And I was drawn here by the strength of your heart and the hope you refuse to abandon, even in the face of despair. It is rare to find such purity, child, and it deserves to be rewarded." Imarya's lips trembled as she tried to comprehend the woman's words. "But how? My dreams are gone. I have nothing left." "Dreams," Mylora said with a gentle smile, "are not so easily destroyed. Come, child, stand." Hesitant but compelled by an inexplicable trust, Imarya rose to her feet. Mylora gestured toward the tattered remains of the gown in Imarya's hands. "Hold it out," the enchantress instructed. Imarya obeyed, and as she did, Mylora began to chant softly, her hands moving gracefully through the air. The rags shimmered, their dull fabric transforming into a gown of breathtaking beauty. It was a cascade of silver and soft blue, the fabric seeming to catch and reflect the light, like moonlight on water. Imarya's eyes widened in wonder as Mylora stepped back, her hands now raised toward the floor. From the dirt and stone beneath their feet, two sparkling glass slippers formed, delicate yet sturdy, as if made for a princess. "For you, Imarya," Mylora said, her voice filled with warmth. "A gift to let the world see the beauty within you." Tears filled Imarya's eyes as she gazed at the gown and slippers. I don't know how to thank you." Mylora placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "There is no need for thanks, my dear. But there is one condition. The enchantment will only last until the stroke of midnight. When the clock strikes 12, everything will return to what it was. Do you understand?" Imarya nodded, her heart racing with a mixture of gratitude and nervousness. "I understand. But what if I fail? What if they see me as nothing more than a girl who doesn't belong?" Mylora smiled softly, her eyes filled with wisdom. It is not the gown or the magic that will make you shine, Imarya. It is your heart, your kindness, and your courage. Remember that, and you will not fail." With those words, Mylora raised her hands once more. A shimmering veil of light enveloped Imarya, and in an instant she was transformed. The gown fit her perfectly, its delicate embroidery sparkling with every movement. The glass slippers gleamed like diamonds, and her hair, once messy and unkempt, now cascaded in soft waves down her back. Imarya turned to the small mirror hanging on the cellar wall, hardly recognizing the girl staring back at her. For the first time in years she felt beautiful, not because of the gown, but because she saw in herself the strength and resilience her mother had always believed in. "Go now, child," Mylora said, opening the cellar door with a flick of her wrist. "The world awaits you." Imarya hesitated for a moment, then turned to Mylora, her eyes brimming with gratitude. "I'll never forget this. Thank you." Mylora smiled once more, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "The rest is up to you, my dear. Be brave." And with that, Imarya stepped out into the night, her heart pounding with anticipation and a flicker of hope reignited within her. The grand palace was alive with music and laughter, its towering walls adorned with golden ribbons and shimmering chandeliers. The ballroom, filled with swirling gowns and sharply tailored suits, radiated a warm, intoxicating glow. The scent of roses and lilies hung in the air, mingling with the sweet, honeyed melodies played by the orchestra. Laughter echoed off the high ceilings, but amidst it all, one sound stood out, a soft, hesitant step. Imarya entered the ballroom with a quiet grace, the soft swish of her gown barely audible against the marble floors. She had never imagined herself in such a place, let alone as the center of attention. But as she stepped into the grand hall, the murmurs of astonishment spread like wildfire. The guests, initially lost in their own conversations, slowly turned to gaze at the newcomer. Her gown, an ethereal cascade of silver and soft blue, caught the light in a dazzling display of color, like moonlight woven into fabric. Her glass slippers glittered, reflecting the candlelight from every angle, and her hair, styled delicately in waves, framed her face with an almost angelic perfection. But it wasn't just her beauty that captivated the room. It was the quiet, unassuming dignity she carried with her, the kind that set her apart from the crowd. Even Azreia, Imarya's cruel stepmother, did a double take as she swept through the room with her two daughters, Safina and Arindra. The trio's eyes widened as they caught sight of Imarya, though they couldn't immediately place her. "Who is that?" Safina whispered, her voice laced with suspicion. "Don't be ridiculous, that's just a servant," Arindra sneered, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. But Azreia was not so easily convinced. She stared, narrowing her eyes. There was something about this girl, this stranger, that seemed oddly familiar. Was it the poise with which she moved, or the soft glow about her? She couldn't tell, but there was something unnerving about her presence. The music swelled as the prince entered, his regal stature commanding the attention of the entire room. Prince Kalan, tall and striking in his military uniform, smiled politely at the guests, but his heart was heavy. The crowd was full of empty flattery and shallow praise, and he was growing tired of it. He longed for something real, something genuine, something beyond the surface of beauty and status. Then, his eyes fell upon Imarya. For a moment, everything else seemed to fade away. The noise, the music, the chatter, all disappeared as his gaze locked onto her. Her eyes, wide with wonder and yet full of quiet strength, held his with a sincerity he hadn't expected. She wasn't trying to impress anyone or fit into the mold of the usual courtiers. There was something in her presence that felt both fragile and unyielding, as if she carried the weight of the world with grace. Without thinking, Kalan made his way toward her, his footsteps sure and deliberate. He could feel the stares of others, the whispers that followed him as he approached, but none of it mattered. All that mattered was her. "May I have this dance?" he asked, his voice deep but gentle. Imarya blinked, unsure for a moment whether she had heard him correctly. Her heart skipped a beat as she realized he was speaking to her. She glanced around, but everyone was watching, waiting. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, and for a fleeting second, she felt unworthy. But then she remembered the strength her mother had taught her, the resilience that ran through her veins. She nodded softly, her cheeks flushed with a mix of nervousness and excitement. Kalan smiled, offering her his hand. "I promise I won't bite," he said with a playful gleam in his eyes. Imarya took his hand, and as they glided across the floor, the world around them seemed to melt away. The music, once distant, became a soft, soothing rhythm that carried them through the dance. Kalan, despite his regal air, was remarkably at ease with her, as though he could sense the quiet beauty within her soul. They spoke, though not of politics or grandeur. Instead, their conversation was simple, sincere. Imarya told him of her love for the garden she secretly tended, the one she kept hidden from her cruel stepmother. She spoke of the memories of her mother, of the strength she drew from her, and of the dreams she once had that seemed impossible now. In turn, Kalan shared his own longing for something real, for someone who could see past his title and wealth. He admitted that he felt trapped in a world that valued appearances above all else, and he longed to find someone who could understand him, someone who didn't simply see him as a prince, but as a person. As they moved together, the connection between them deepened. Imarya felt a warmth spread through her chest, a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. For once, she didn't feel invisible or beneath anyone. She was seen, truly seen, for who she was. But as the night wore on, a sense of urgency began to creep in. Imarya's mind raced as she glanced toward the large clock hanging on the far wall. The time was slipping away. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her steps grew more hurried, more panicked. "Forgive me, Your Highness," she murmured, breaking away from him with a gentle but firm pull. "I must go." Kalan watched her, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Wait, why?" But before he could finish, she turned and fled. The clock ticked louder in her ears as she hurried toward the door, the weight of the impending midnight pressing down on her. The grand hall blurred around her, the guests' voices fading into the background. As she neared the entrance, she felt something catch under her foot, and with a soft gasp, she lost her balance. She stumbled, but in that moment, one of her glass slippers slipped off her foot and skidded across the floor, leaving a trail of sparkling dust in its wake. Imarya barely noticed. Her heart was pounding in her ears, her mind consumed with the panic of knowing the magic would soon fade. She couldn't risk being caught by Azreia and her daughters. She had to leave before it was too late. She dashed out into the night, the last lingering echoes of the ball fading into the distance behind her. The slipper, left forgotten on the ballroom floor, remained as the only trace of her fleeting presence. The day after the ball, the kingdom buzzed with excitement. News of the stunning, mysterious girl who had captured the prince's heart spread like wildfire, and soon whispers filled every corner of Azreia. Prince Kalan, having found the glass slipper left behind in the grand hall, was determined to find the woman who had stolen his attention, his heart, and his thoughts. He would stop at nothing to track her down. "I will find her," Kalan declared firmly, his voice ringing with resolve. "I swear, she will be found no matter where she hides. This slipper will lead me to her." The royal guards, dressed in their finest attire, were dispatched throughout the kingdom, visiting every home, every manor, every cottage. Their task was simple: find the maiden whose foot fit the slipper. The entire kingdom had become consumed with the search, with every eligible young woman eager to try on the slipper in hopes that it would lead her to the prince. News of the search reached even the most distant corners of Azreia, and each household buzzed with anticipation. However, despite the kingdom's excitement, the slipper did not seem to fit anyone, except for one: Imarya. In a far corner of the kingdom, Azreia watched the commotion unfold with growing concern. She had no intention of letting her stepdaughter be discovered, especially after the humiliation she had suffered at the ball. Imarya's sudden appearance, her beauty, and the prince's evident interest in her were a threat to Azreia's carefully crafted world of wealth and privilege. Realizing that the prince's search was now focused on the slipper, Azreia went into full panic mode. "She cannot be found," she muttered under her breath, pacing back and forth in the dim light of the drawing room. Her mind raced as she thought of ways to hide Imarya. "She's the one. I know it." Azreia's first move was swift. She locked Imarya in the cellar again, chaining the door behind her. The cold, damp air of the cellar was a cruel reminder of the isolation Imarya had endured, but this time, Azreia added a bitter twist. She instructed her daughters, Safina and Arindra, to try on the slipper, determined to find a woman who could fit it and avoid the inevitable confrontation with the prince. Safina, who was overly confident in her own beauty, wasted no time. She slipped her foot into the slipper, but the shoe didn't even come close to fitting. Her foot was too wide, and the delicate glass made a soft cracking sound as she forced it on. Arindra, not to be outdone by her sister, tried next. She too failed, her foot too large to slide into the tiny glass shoe. Frustration built in Azreia's chest. She paced in circles, muttering to herself about how fate seemed to be playing a cruel joke on her. "It's useless," Safina sighed, looking at her mother disappointed. "It doesn't fit. None of us are her." Azreia glared at the slipper in frustration. She couldn't allow the prince to find Imarya. She would go to any lengths to stop that from happening. In the midst of Azreia's frustration, one of the royal servants overheard her scheming. A lowly palace servant named Dorian, who had served the royal family for years, happened to be passing by the drawing room. He had seen Azreia's reaction to the prince's proclamation, and he could not ignore the implication of her words. As the loyal servant lingered, he heard enough to understand what was at stake. "This must not reach the prince," Dorian whispered to himself, his heart pounding with the weight of what he had just learned. He had no doubt that Azreia was trying to hide Imarya, the very girl whom the prince sought. With a sense of duty, Dorian rushed to find Kalan. At the palace, the prince stood in the royal chambers, his gaze fixed on the glass slipper. He had ordered the search to continue, but something in his heart told him that he was getting closer. He needed to know for sure who the slipper belonged to, but time was running out. As he stood by the window, staring out at the kingdom, Dorian appeared at his side, breathless from his swift journey. "Your Highness," Dorian began, bowing deeply, "I have urgent news." Kalan turned, his eyes narrowing. "What is it?" "I overheard a conversation at the manor of Lady Azreia, the woman who holds Imarya," Dorian said, his voice low. "She is trying to prevent the slipper from being delivered to its rightful owner." Kalan's eyes widened. "Azreia? But why?" Dorian hesitated, but then explained in full, detailing Azreia's scheme to hide Imarya and the steps she had taken to lock her away. "This is an outrage," Kalan said, anger rising in his chest. "That girl is the one I danced with. I knew it. I will not let her be hidden any longer." He turned to his guards. "Prepare to go to Lady Azreia's manor at once. We will search every corner until we find her." As the prince prepared to leave, Dorian bowed again, grateful that his loyalty had led him to the right choice. Kalan's determination only grew as the truth unfolded. His heart ached to know that Imarya was being hidden from him, but he had no intention of giving up. The girl in the slipper was the one he wanted. Imarya, the one whose beauty came from within. He would find her, no matter what it took. The grand manor of Lady Azreia was eerily quiet, save for the whispers of servants and the occasional sound of guards' boots echoing on the stone floors. In the stillness, Azreia paced the drawing room, her thoughts consumed by her growing fear. She had done everything in her power to keep Imarya hidden, but now, with the prince's search gaining speed and intensity, it seemed her grip on the situation was slipping. Her daughters, Safina and Arindra, had tried and failed to fit the glass slipper, but Azreia could feel the inevitable nearing. Imarya's discovery was only a matter of time. Outside, Prince Kalan led his men through the streets, determined to uncover the truth. The search had taken him to countless houses already, but when his guards arrived at Azreia's manor, a feeling of certainty washed over him. He had known it in his heart. The girl he had danced with that fateful night was somewhere close by. And now, the slipper would lead him to her. Inside the manor, Imarya was hidden away, locked in the cellar, the darkness of her confinement pressing down on her. Her spirit, despite the cruelty she had suffered, remained unbroken. But her heart beat faster as she heard the distant sounds of voices and hurried footsteps approaching. The door to the cellar was thrown open, and her eyes squinted against the sudden flood of light. 2 royal guards, their expressions grave, stepped inside. They wasted no time in taking her by the arms, leading her up the stairs and out into the sunlight. Imarya's heart raced, and for a moment she feared the worst. But she didn't resist. She had been through so much already. What more could they possibly do to her? Her mother's necklace still hung around her neck, a small comfort, a reminder of the strength her mother had instilled in her. The guards led her to the palace where Kalan awaited, standing tall with a look of quiet determination on his face. The moment he saw her, everything else faded away. Imarya stood before him, her once tattered clothes replaced with the delicate gown crafted by Melora. Though she appeared to be an ordinary girl, there was an unmistakable grace about her that instantly captivated Kalan. Imarya's heart pounded in her chest as she stood before the prince. The glass slipper was placed before her, gleaming in the sunlight. A hush fell over the room as Kalan knelt before her, holding the slipper gently, as though it were the most precious thing in the world. Imarya took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she stepped forward. She placed her foot into the slipper, and it fit perfectly, just as it had that night at the ball. A surge of emotion flooded her chest, but she said nothing, her eyes locked with Kalan's. She knew, deep down, that this was the moment her life would change forever. Kalan stood, his eyes never leaving Imarya's face. He took her hand, his voice soft but full of certainty. "You are the one I danced with that night," he said, his words filled with awe. "But who are you, truly?" Imarya took a deep breath, the weight of her truth heavy on her shoulders. "My name is Imarya, Prince Kalan. I am the daughter of Lady Azreia, though I am but a servant in her house." At her words, the room fell silent, and the prince's gaze darkened with understanding. He had suspected as much, but hearing it from her lips only solidified his resolve. "Imarya," he repeated softly, as though testing the name on his tongue. "You are not who they claimed you to be. You are worthy of so much more." As the prince stood in front of Imarya, the doors to the room suddenly burst open. Azreia, her steps heavy with dread, entered with Safina and Arindra at her side. They had no idea that their world was about to crumble, but when their eyes landed on Imarya and Kalan, they froze. "Imarya!" Azreia hissed, her eyes narrowing with a mixture of fury and disbelief. "What is this? How dare you?" Kalan raised a hand, silencing her. "Enough, Lady Azreia. You have been hiding the truth for far too long. Your cruelty and deceit will not go unpunished." Azreia's face twisted with panic. "This is my house, my kingdom. You have no right." "The only right I have is to justice," Kalan interrupted, his voice cold as ice. "You and your daughters have caused Imarya immeasurable harm. You have forced her into servitude, belittled her, and sought to destroy her spirit. Your actions will not be tolerated." With that, Kalan turned to the royal guards, who stepped forward, their faces grim. "Take them," Kalan ordered. "Strip them of their titles and privileges. They shall be held accountable for their crimes." Safina and Arindra, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, now realized the gravity of their situation. As the guards took hold of them, their smug expressions faded into fear. Azreia, once so powerful and full of disdain, now stood helpless, her face flushed with shame. As she was led out of the room, Azreia turned to Imarya, her voice low and full of venom. "You will regret this, girl. You will never escape my wrath." But Imarya stood tall, her voice steady and calm as she looked at the woman who had tormented her for so long. "I forgive you," she said softly. "I forgive you because my mother taught me that kindness is stronger than hatred, and I will carry her lessons with me for the rest of my life." The room fell silent at Imarya's words. Kalan, who had been watching the exchange with a mixture of admiration and disbelief, stepped closer to Imarya. His heart swelled with respect for her strength and grace. "You are truly extraordinary, Imarya," Kalan said, his voice filled with admiration. "You've endured so much, and yet your heart remains pure. That is why I will make you my queen." Imarya's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled gently. She had never imagined this moment, this life. But now, standing before Kalan, she felt hope for the future. "I will rule beside you," she said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "But only if we can make this kingdom a place of fairness, kindness, and justice for all." Kalan nodded, his hand gently cupping hers. "Together, we will make Azreia a place where love and truth reign above all else." And so, with Azreia and her daughters facing the consequences of their cruelty, Imarya and Kalan began a new chapter of their lives, a chapter built on love, justice, and forgiveness. The days following the revelation of Imarya's true identity were filled with rapid changes as Prince Kalan worked quickly to finalize his decision and set the kingdom on a new course. After the public exposure of Lady Azreia and her daughters, the people of Azreia eagerly looked to their prince for guidance. They knew that his heart had been tested, but they also knew that his judgment was as unwavering as ever. Now, with Imarya at his side, they could look forward to a brighter, more just future. It was a quiet evening in the royal gardens when Kalan finally approached Imarya, his steps slow but purposeful. The sun had begun to dip below the horizon, casting a soft, golden light on the flowers that bloomed in abundance around them. Imarya stood by the small fountain her mother had adored, lost in thought. The air was fragrant with the scent of jasmine and roses, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Imarya felt a sense of peace settle over her. Kalan approached her gently, as though he didn't want to disturb the fragile stillness of the moment. He took a deep breath, his heart racing with the emotions he had kept locked away since their first encounter at the ball. "Imarya," he began, his voice soft but filled with sincerity. She turned to face him, her brown eyes catching the fading light. "There are many things I could say, but the most important is this. I love you. I have loved you since the first moment we danced. But it isn't just your beauty or grace that captivates me. It is your strength, your kindness, and the purity of your heart. You have endured so much, and yet you remain unbroken. That is the woman I want by my side." Imarya's heart fluttered, emotions she had long buried beginning to surface. She had never expected a prince, much less someone as noble as Kalan, to love her for who she truly was. She had spent years in the shadow of her cruel stepmother, fighting to hold on to the memory of her mother, yearning for love and acceptance. And now, standing in the glow of the garden with Kalan before her, it was as if all her dreams were coming true at once. "Kalan," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath, "you have shown me kindness when I thought it was lost. You've seen me for who I truly am, not the broken girl I once was, but someone deserving of happiness. I accept your love, and I accept the future you are offering me." Her voice trembled slightly, but it was filled with hope. Hope for the life they would build together, for the people they would lead, and for the love that had blossomed from something so unexpected. Mother's memory. It would be a place of peace, a place where flowers bloomed year-round, symbolizing the hope that had always been in her heart. The royal gardeners worked tirelessly, and soon a beautiful, vibrant garden flourished, filled with roses, daisies, and jasmine. It became a sanctuary for Imarya and Kalan, a place where they could escape the pressures of the palace and spend quiet moments together. Imarya would often walk among the flowers, her thoughts drifting to her mother, and she felt a deep sense of gratitude for the lessons her mother had imparted to her. The people of Azreia were overjoyed at the news of the engagement. They had seen the transformation of the young woman who had once been their servant, and they had witnessed the strength and determination she had shown in the face of adversity. They had watched as she rose above her circumstances, and now they would watch as she became their queen. Imarya's story became a symbol of hope for the kingdom, a reminder that no matter how difficult life may seem, love and kindness could always triumph. On the day of their wedding, the kingdom rejoiced. The streets of Azreia were lined with flowers, the air filled with music and laughter. People from all corners of the kingdom gathered to witness the union of their prince and the woman who had captured his heart. Imarya, dressed in a gown fit for a queen, walked down the aisle with her heart full of love, her hand resting gently in Kalan's as they prepared to begin their new life together. The ceremony was simple but beautiful, a reflection of their shared values of humility, kindness, and strength. As Kalan placed the crown upon Imarya's head, the kingdom erupted in cheers, and for the first time in her life, Imarya felt as though she truly belonged. She was not just the daughter of a cruel woman. She was the queen of Azreia, a queen who would rule with compassion and wisdom. Years later, Imarya's legacy would live on, not just in the royal garden that bore her mother's name, but in the hearts of the people she served. Her story became a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the face of great hardship, love could heal and kindness could change the world. As the kingdom flourished under her and Kalan's reign, Imarya's tale was told to generations to come, an enduring testament to the power of resilience, forgiveness, and love.